Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Yenvy Truong. I'm a serial entrepreneur and founder. I've been in the healthcare and wellness space for a very long time, almost 2 decades now. And then not only in healthcare and wellness, but in various like longevity and other types of companies. And along the way, over the past 2 decades, I've had the ability to really meet amazing individuals like Dr. Michelle Cox and other founders and entrepreneurs and business leaders and doctors and scientists, etc. And so I thought this webinar and this series of webinar would be a great opportunity to really show the value in the individuals I've met. I've met a lot and I've worked with a lot of not just doctors, but scientists and nutritionists. And so along the way, I always find that the diamond in the rough and the physicians and individuals that, they're not out there promoting themselves, but they have the quality of health that they provide and information they provide so spectacular. And so I just want to showcase them and give them the opportunity to shine and show you, all the information that you deserve. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and just uh, kind of go over the setup that we have. Normally, we'll do about 20 to 30 minutes of, Dr. Cox will present the webinar. Today's webinar is on sleep disruption and perimenopause. We start, going through this cycle of waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I remember meeting Dr. Cox about a year and a half ago or so. And I was like, I'm having a hard time sleeping. I had no idea it was perimenopause that I was already starting to go through or had been going through for a while. And I was like, I just wake up at 3 in the morning. And she gave me some different ways of navigating, my sleep cycle and everything like that. And one of them was just like putting my feet up against the wall. And I started doing that, and now I do it every single night, and it's really nice. Like it's a nice way for me just to like have the blood flow, but it does help me sleep throughout the night. And so when there's little disruptions, there's different strategies and things to know about that holistically can help you as well. But Dr. Cox will go over the science and physiology of why this happens, and then your options on getting a better night's sleep, and which option is right for you. And then you always have the opportunity to talk to Dr. Cox afterwards as well. So before I introduce Dr. Cox, I'm going to read a quick disclaimer, and I'll have her get started. Okay. The information provided in this webinar, sleep disruption and perimenopause, what to do about it, featuring Dr. Michelle Cox, is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Participation in this webinar does not establish a doctor-patient relationship um, between between participant and Dr. Michelle Cox or any other presenters. Any actions taken based on the information provided during this webinar are done at your own discretion. We strongly recommend consulting with your healthcare provider before implementing any strategies discussed. And so we'll do about 20 to 30-minute educational format. And then afterwards, I have some questions that, I get very often. I have questions just coming from myself that I can share with Dr. Cox afterwards. And then if you have any questions, this is your opportunity to put it into the Q&A box, and we will answer those questions at the end. And so that's a great opportunity for you to ask Dr. Cox, anything that's more specific that we didn't touch on during the hour. Right. So welcome, Dr. Cox. You were here before. We did a webinar, and it's on our YouTube channel, a webinar on perimenopause and what to do about it and what you should know about it and all the symptoms around it. And so now, sleep is not just about perimenopause, but it's about everything. It's one of the biggest pillars in health. And so welcome.
Thank you, Yenvy. So happy to be back. All right, I will share my screen from a logistical standpoint, make sure we're good to go. Oh, it says, there we go. Did you allow now?
Yep.
Okay, cool. One moment. Okay. All right, and then, Tell me when you can see my screen, please. Can you see it?
All good. Yeah.
Okay, great. So, Yenvy, thanks for doing the disclaimer. It's gotten more robust, which I love since we first started. But yes, just to reiterate, this is for educational purposes only and not intended to replace personalized medical advice, right? Because as Yenvy mentioned, everyone is different. And I really want to highlight that because we're all unique as individuals. And while I'll share my personal experiences or clinical knowledge, like everyone's journey is different. And the whole point is to empower you with information to advocate for your own health with confidence so you can have these conversations, much like Yenvy was talking about. So with that said, all right, so we'll be talking about restoring rest in general, navigating sleep in perimenopause. And Yenvy, I love that you talked about the legs up because it's one of the ways to chill your nervous system, your what's called your parasympathetic nervous system. So everything is like so interconnected. And a lot of people, before I begin this whole foundation, I want to give you a little background about myself. It's going to be way more holistic and like looking at a big picture because everything, whether it's your intuition, your mind, your body, and your energy, it's all interrelated. And so necessarily sticking to all mental processes or sticking to maybe even pseudoscience sometimes, or, things that could have been passed from generations, which may or may not be true. And then your energy levels and your body, they're all interconnected together. And I found that the most, I guess, vitality promoting honors all of them. Okay, so I'm showing you this map more so that you know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about interconnectedness. Just looking at how even spirituality, the mind, body, and lifestyle, they all feed together into your overall wellness. So as Yenvy mentioned, we talked about perimenopause and menopause on our first talk. And given that we are talking about this specifically as it relates to sleep today, I thought I'd review this slide with you guys, with you ladies, everyone who's here. So remember that during this premenopause period, the ovaries are very responsive. This is when, things are hopefully more predictable. Now, of course, we have issues with that even today for lots of different reasons, but in an ideal state, premenopause, estrogen and progesterone, we're supposed to have regular cycles, predictable patterns, ovaries are responding, fertility is at its peak, and we have like the best sleep and health cycles and things like that. So something to keep in mind is, let's say you had disrupted sleep cycle since you were young, that's a conversation to have because it could be related to something else too. All right, so something to think about. When I was younger, did I have trouble sleeping? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, okay, cool, because then maybe it might be more hormone related. And we can talk about that. Then the perimenopause period, which is what we're focusing on today, a little different than postmenopause, but we're going to be focusing in this region. All of a sudden, this is looking at estrogen levels here. This is looking at age. The average onset of menopause itself, that means permanent cessation of your menses or period, no longer bleeding, happens at age 51. Okay, but before that, like 4 to 10 years before that, late 30s is when we usually start to see disruption in our sleep cycles. That starts happening over here in the late 30s, like I said, and then estrogen slowly declines. But even though it's not shown here, one of the things that declines first is progesterone. Okay. Oh, give me 1 second. I got a little out of order because Yenvy, you talked about caffeine, and so I did a whole slide on caffeine because it's such a topic, but we'll go back to that here in a minute. So what I want to talk about real quick is, okay, so high estrogen levels, or you can also, this is kind of synonymous with low progesterone levels. What happens at the beginning, towards our late 30s, we start to get something called anovulatory cycles, meaning we actually don't produce an egg and push it out. And when we do that, when we ovulate, there's something called the corpus luteum that makes and secretes progesterone. Okay, and in the absence of that, if we don't have ovulating, like an actual, ovulation occurring, progesterone levels are lower. And then the quality starts to decrease. The body starts telling, hey, I need more eggs. FSH goes up. I need more eggs. I need more eggs. And we start to get a little haywire happening right there. Okay. So really, the first things that we start to notice are progesterone deficiency. And what does that look like? Basically, also, what we're going to see here as symptoms of high estrogen, or it's just estrogen unopposed. So breast tenderness, fullness, sometimes even engorgement, shorter cycles or heavy periods, depression, anxiety, mood swings, hormonal migraines, irregular vaginal bleeding happening when it shouldn't, fibroids, and even water retention happening. And I point this out because all these things, especially like depression, anxiety, mood swings, migraines, things like that, they start to impact our mood and our sleep, and they start disrupting our everyday life, right? But then on the other side of that, as the estrogen starts to drop, then we start getting hotter and we can't sleep. Our body temperature goes up. So I'm going to go into really quick, we'll go into the key drivers of sleep issues in perimenopause. But before that, let's talk about what is considered like an actually healthy sleep cycle. So this is going to align with your natural circadian rhythm. Okay, typically between 10 p.m. to 6 for most people. Now there's different chronotypes, or people who like are early birds or night owls, where their shift can, maybe they're like a midnight to 8 a.m., or they're a little bit more like an 8 p.m. to 4 a.m., and there are some variations even amongst that, but there's different chronotypes, and that also gets impacted with hormones. So even if, let's say, you used to be an early riser or you used to be a night owl, your hormones can completely shift that, meaning specifically estrogen and progesterone, because it'll start impacting what's called your circadian rhythm and making you less responsive to the other hormones that regulate the other processes of your circadian rhythm. So ideally, you're falling to sleep easily within 20 minutes. Okay. You go through 4 to 6 sleep cycles, ranging from 90 minutes to 120 minutes. And so there are some people who are fast sleepers, as I like to call them, that they may not need as much sleep. They have shorter, more condensed sleep cycles that are really healthy. Genetics play a role in that. Hormones play a role in that as well. But the idea is that you're getting sufficient deep or slow wave sleep happening, and also REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, both are which are vital for hormone balance, emotional regulation, and physical restoration. So you don't want to be waking up more than a couple of times. Hey, you got to go pee or whatever, but hopefully it's just like a quick wake up, fall asleep, and it's really easy. And the real test of if you're sleeping well is you feel rested and you're alert without dependence on caffeine or any other stimulants. Just kidding. Yes, they were laughing. Like, let me pause right here for effect. So that's how you know. Okay. All right. So what are the key drivers of sleep issues in perimenopause? We have a reduction because estrogen declines. We have a reduction in serotonin and how we actually use it. And serotonin is actually made to make melatonin too. And oh gosh, that's the brain gut axis as well. A lot of serotonin is made in your gut. But ultimately, I'm recapping a lot of things, trying to kind of simplify it for you today. But we can definitely get into this in more detail in separate conversations. But in general, it's going to make it harder for you to stay asleep, fall asleep and stay asleep. Okay. And then it also impacts so Sarah wakes us up. Serotonin helps with our liveliness too. And like how we're ready to interact with the day. Right. And melatonin puts us to sleep. Right. And so as estrogen modulates those things as well, it makes it so that it's harder for us to be more awake and then also to fall asleep. As estrogen declines, as we talked about, we get an increase in core body temperature. So worsening of night sweats, sleep disruption happening. And we'll talk about some of the ways to support this here in a moment. Yenvy, how am I on time? Sorry, I'm at 14 minutes. Okay. So, all right, progesterone dropping. Progesterone is a natural sedative, actually. It's pretty cool, works via the GABA receptors. And it's an anti-anxiety hormone, which is really cool. So remember, that's the first hormone that starts to decline, and that can start the insomnia pattern, the sleep disruption pattern, and like increased nighttime awakening. And then that kind of like it stacks over time because then our mood is off and everything else. So as we were talking about earlier, these kind of feed in downstream effects. Now we have melatonin reduction happening. So our pineal gland in our brain is where melatonin's made, and it tends to calcify as we get older, and the natural production actually stops too. This is paired with other hormonal shifts and disruption of our circadian rhythm. The night sweats we talked about, our mood changes and anxiety, fluctuating on those GABA and serotonin pathways. So they're going to leave us more susceptible for anxiety and depression, which can impair our sleep. And then as we enter perimenopause, women have a higher risk of developing something called obstructive sleep apnea. So really, I encourage everyone to get screened for that, to talk to your provider about that, especially if you're starting to gain weight, which does happen for multiple reasons, such as insulin resistance and high cortisol levels, estrogen, progesterone in general, because we're talking about perimenopause, right, are important in what they call HPA, so your hypothalamic pituitary axis regulation, okay, to help. And we become less responsive to things as our hormones are shifting. So, especially if you snore. So if your partner tells you, you're like, hey, babe, you were a little tired last night, eh? You were snoring, then you definitely want to get screened. So, yeah, we got 16 minutes. So here's some evidence-based, holistic, looks at things. So we want to have consistent sleep wake times. What does that mean? Even on the weekends, ladies, like if you normally go to bed at 10 and you get up at 6, it's the same on the weekends. Now, that doesn't mean you have to get up and go do your workout and whatever else. It could be you're reading, but you're up and you're giving yourself, giving your body, sleep is a learned habit, is what I like to say. Technically, I said cooling bed and bedroom temperature. This is great if you're a man or a woman. It's 68 degrees, but I like saying less than 69. So, we think 69 bedroom, little fun here, easy to remember, bring the temperature, cool it down. Avoid caffeine and alcohol and sugar. I'm going to add in the evening. Okay, so those glucose spikes are going to wake you up. Evening breath work or parasympathetic. So this is what Yenvy was talking about, the chill rituals, which we talk about with our clients, but one of which is putting your legs up. Another one is like blowing through a straw like that. And so these are different ways to activate your chill side. So instead of calling it fight and flight, I like to call it like being aroused and then chilling, because your sympathetic nervous system is also important for paying attention and getting stuff done. And it's not always bad, so we're activating it in healthy ways, and we're helping our chill system or our parasympathetic system activate as well. Supplements, I'm not going to go through dosing because everyone's a little different, but magnesium glycinate, there's different types. So you want to avoid magnesium stearate. Magnesium oxide is kind of like, but magnesium glycinate, threonate, there's different types of magnesium. So specifically the common one is magnesium glycinate here. Okay, so pay attention. L-theanine is wonderful. GABA, I'm going to say to use that, to consider that that's nuanced. I put it there, but do that in discussion with a provider that is familiar with this. Melatonin, again, my partner and I, Dr. Myrna, we always want to promote your own production of different things first as much as possible, supporting you. And usually when you take things exogenously, meaning you take things via supplement, it down regulates or tells your body, hey, I don't have to do that anymore. So I would say melatonin with the caveat of reestablishing a sleep cycle, because remember, sleep is a learned habit, and some of it is just getting used to things. But if you do, it's low dose, okay? So 0.3 to 1 milligram tops. Adaptogens. So what are adaptogens? They help regulate like your cortisol spikes and like your HPA axis. So ashwagandha and rhodiola are really great for stress modulation. And then, of course, hormone therapy. So progesterone is wonderful in that it can be sedating and it can improve sleep quality. Most studies are shown on oral progesterone, although topical progesterone is fantastic and we use it often. And we tend to have less of the symptoms of what, like bloating, water retention, things like that, that most women will get with too much progesterone, or you're way too tired and you don't feel like doing anything. So there is a such thing as too much. And then transdermal estrogen is my favorite way to do it, which is like via a patch, which you can get at your local pharmacy to reduce night sweat. And estrogen, just based on what we talked about earlier with the serotonin and serotonin and melatonin pathways, it helps regulate your circadian rhythm. Okay. And then, of course, sleep trackers. These are kind of a double-edged sword, if you ask me, because some people look at them and if it stresses you out, I'm not going to be telling you to look at it, right? Too much. But if it's something that you're like, oh, wow, my sleep onset time, like the time it took me to fall asleep was this long. And okay, like if you're able to just kind of look at it as information, then I'm all about it. And we can compare it over time. I like to say, okay, how did you do last month versus this month versus the next month? I think that's really important for people to be able to not get so tied up in the results. Okay. So overall, practical tips. We taught, this is from the original talk that we did, just because this is important. There's also cognitive behavioral therapy for mood and sleep, really addressing things like this is our time, as I like to say, as we move from perimenopause to menopause, this is our time of legacy. This is our time of giving back. This is where our goddess comes out the most. Okay, so we're no longer producing babies, but we are producing legacy, right? And so now it's time for us to look at our shadows in our subconscious mind, right? And spiritually, before I transition out of this body, what did I come here to do? Okay, so taking a look at that, that's this time. And processes like cognitive behavioral therapy, there's other things, way more other things out there in this psychiatric and spiritual fields. I will say this is your time to take a look at that, and you'll see that it'll feed into your mood and your sleep. It's there to teach you a lesson. And so if you're listening for it, you'll embody more wisdom, which is the whole point of this era, right? And then acupuncture is fantastic. There's some different medications. And look, I am not, even though I'm very holistic, I do not throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think pharmaceuticals are there to help as well. I personally, if you're concerned about just the way I operate, there's a difference between like chemical dependency and avoidance of doing the work versus doing the work. So just as a side note, Dr. Myrna and I are all about doing the work. It's not about putting a Band-Aid on something. And then, sometimes you can't have certain hormones. That's when we talk about supplements. There's anti-inflammatory foods that are going to have more what's called phytogens in them to help. There's stress management, like mindfulness, yoga. Those are actually shown to reduce symptoms by like 30 to 40% in some studies too. So there's a lot of different options out there. So here are some key takeaways from our talk today. Healthy sleep is rhythmic, restorative, and hormone responsive. Progesterone drops first, usually creating vulnerability to sleep disruptions when we're talking about entering perimenopause. Estrogen loss destabilizes circadian cues. So let me put that in English. That means like your body is not responsive as it would have been to the normal chemicals that are in your body. It's just not listening as well. Okay. And then solutions that we talked about include lifestyle, hormone therapy, other tracking tools. And the whole idea is to support restoring the rhythm, resilience, and rest. Before we end, I made this special slide for Yenvy on caffeine, and I'm going to go back. Anyway, because I love you. Anyhow, so let's talk about caffeine just for a split moment here and give you a little bit more science so that I think it's worth a few extra minutes yet to go into this. Okay, thank you. Thank you for saying yes. So there is a cortisol awakening response that happens. So basically, when you have caffeine within 30 to 45 minutes, let's say without caffeine, you're supposed to have a normal cortisol spike to wake you up. And oh, by the way, in perimenopause, and more specifically as you get into menopause, that spike happens closer to 3 a.m., 4 a.m., not when you want it. Okay, so there's different ways to move that spike to later in the morning, which is where we want it, all right? So you naturally release a surge of cortisol. This is part of your circadian rhythm, and it helps promote alertness, mobilize energy, regulate your blood sugar and inflammation. Why this matters: if you drink caffeine during this natural cortisol peak, you're layering an external stimulant on top of an internal one. Okay, so this can desensitize your cortisol receptors. So all of a sudden, you hear this beautiful music, which is your morning cortisol, waking you up, everything's great. And then all of a sudden you got like heavy metal playing and you're like, your body's like, what the hell is going on? So it stops listening. Okay. And it doesn't respond anymore. So this flattens your natural energy curve. Your receptors are desensitized. In other words, leading to greater caffeine dependence later in the day. So you get that afternoon crash where you're like, oh, I need a Red Bull, heaven forbid. But I'm just saying, there's people that drink this. Anyway, and this can also increase your stress, anxiety levels in different people. All right. So you'll notice mid-afternoon, you start to get more anxious. So adenosine clearing upon waking. So what is this whole adenosine thing? So ATP gets broken down. It's like the main energy thing in your body. Adenosine builds up throughout the day. We want that to happen. It helps us sleep. So when you wake, your brain has already been clearing that adenosine overnight, and it's low in the morning. But since caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors, drinking it right away may not provide that noticeable boost that you want, and it'll actually lead to crashing later up once the adenosine builds back up. Okay, because we want it to get taken out more, and we're blocking those receptors with that. So the ideal strategy is waiting 60 to 90 minutes after waking, or at least 30 minutes if you're easing into it, to let your cortisol peak naturally as you wake up. Adenosine remain cleared, maximizing the effectiveness of your caffeine for later. You'll notice you may not need that afternoon cup. And then this will help you with sleep resilience, better circadian rhythms, more stable energy across the day, less of that afternoon crash. Okay, I hope that was helpful. I like going through that because a lot of people are like, wow, don't touch my. Okay, so here we go. This is me and Dr. Myrna. My favorite way for you guys to reach me is just honestly to text me and just give me some time to get back to you. hello@lifebloom.info is our email where you can reach us. And then our website is lifebloom.health. And with that, I will stop the share screen and open it for questions. So right at 30 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Um, okay, so I took a bunch of notes and I have some questions as well, but there's a couple of things, just kind of going directly into what you mentioned about the cortisol peak, right? You mentioned that around was it about around 4 a.m. or so, that's when cortisol starts to peak or so? Is that
It's going to signal your body to wake. So for
okay?
everyone, it's a little different, but really that should be peaking around 30 to 45 minutes after you wake up. And so
Okay.
what happens is if you have a shift in that, because you have dysregulation for whatever reason, multiple
Mhm.
reasons, that can cause you to wake up at 3 a.m. if that
Mm,
cortisol peak is happening.
right.
The other thing is hypoglycemia and low
Mm,
sugars is tends to go with that, which chicken and egg, but cortisol can help increase sugar levels in your bloodstream. So if somebody is hypoglycemic, for an example, at 3 or 4 in the morning, then for multiple hormonal reasons, which I can get into, then that can also cause that cortisol spike to happen.
so I had a bunch of different, I have a low blood sugar, like
Mhm.
hypoglycemia, and I was on this CGM, and at
Mhm.
some point throughout the night when I started checking my glucose level, it
Mhm.
was, I think 29 was one of the days where it was the lowest,
Mm.
and then it would drop down to, I was like, how am I alive right now? Right?
Yeah.
Because
Mhm.
on a no during the day it would be normal, but still a little low, right?
Right.
And I'm a fairly healthy eater, right?
Mhm.
Not healthy eater, but healthy diet, for the most part, depending. But this was over the a number of years where my sugar would drop, and that could now it makes sense on how that could have the combination of that, and then going through my hormonal perimenopause, and then the
Mhm.
glucose spikes for whatever reason I had for dinner, you know, um, could could really add to just waking up in the middle of the night or sleep disruption throughout the night itself. Now, just to have an idea in regards to kind of going back to the cortisol peak, for example, like if I was to say, okay, well, what is my natural time, right? That's specific for me. What would you say, the best way to like give me an example of, winding down and then waking up for me to understand, this is what my natural circadian rhythm would look like for me. Like what would be that process? Like how should I take that step?
Okay, so there's one way to measure your cortisol curves. Usually that's done through a saliva test where they check it at 5 different times throughout the day. So you can start to look at that curve and look for what we call curve reversal too happening, where you get a spike at night instead of at sleep, instead of in the morning when you're supposed to. So to say, when we look at that graph, we know it's healthier to be higher in the morning and then dropping throughout the day, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get a little extra in the evening, but the idea is not that you're so overstimulated, you're not so wired and tired, right? That
Mhm.
you can't fall asleep. And that's usually what happens. So that's called a reversal in the cortisol curve. All
Right.
right. And so, so your question was like, what should it look like?
Yeah.
Is it
So if
higher
I
in the
was to,
morning and lower? Uh-huh. Go
yeah,
ahead.
so naturally, right? Understanding that cortisol is going to be at its highest. How do I know what my real circadian rhythm time should be? Like natural.
Like what your chronotype is?
It could
Or
be, yeah, I guess you can say chronotype because we really try
because
to,
circadian is the sun. It's
yeah.
the biorhythm.
But
It's
your chronotype may not align with the circadian itself, and you would have a different circadian, right? Like,
it's small variations, and usually that chronotype from a genetic perspective is not necessarily like, oh, I'm how do I say this? Like an early morning, late riser. It's looking at sleep cycles and how condensed they are and
yeah,
how much light sleep you need too.
okay,
And but it's also impacted by your hormones.
okay.
So really it's from a historical perspective. So like let's say you came in, I'll say, yeah, okay. When were you sleeping the best? And you're
Hmm.
like, oh, when I was 22 and I was doing blah, 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 whatever. And then we try to map it from there to see, okay, that is the time that you had the most um, non-disrupted sleep, you were feeling super energized, you were working out, you were not using stimulants, and we take it from a historical perspective like that. That's my approach, at least.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, you know how with babies, they have a harder time going to sleep when they're overly exhausted? Is
Yep,
something that
overstimulated.
can, yeah, is that
Yep,
something that can happen for us as well? And
a
we have
billion
really rough
percent.
time. Yeah. Like if
Yeah.
I worked out really hard,
Mhm.
and I just go, 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 go all day, a lot of times when you're so tired, you're like, oh my God, I can't wait to hit, the bed, go to bed so I can go to sleep. And then all of a sudden you're laying there and you're like, I can't fall asleep. And
Mhm.
so could you kind of explain how that works? And then if does hormone actually play a role in making that worse, for example?
Hormones make it, like lack of hormones make
Yeah.
it worse.
Hmm.
Okay. So when you work out, you're burning a lot of ATP, right? So in general, when you work out through the day, like it's great for you. Now, when you exercise, you also get some cortisol spike releases, right? To tell your body to release sugar into your bloodstream for your muscles to be able to use it. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So doing that now, I mean, again, everyone's different, but
Hmm.
I'm telling you with the vast majority, working out really hard close to bedtime is not a great idea. Now, for some people, they're paradoxical, meaning they're the exact opposite. That does great for them, and they're the caveat to this. But in general, having that spike, okay, of cortisol, bringing all that sugar into the bloodstream for good purposes, metabolism, catabolism, things like that, afterwards, then it's okay, but it's going to disrupt your sleep,
Mm.
right? But ideally, if you do it a little bit earlier in the day, that adenosine, because you're burning through ATP, is going to build up and is also helpful at saying, shh, it's time to sleep now, too.
Hmm.
Okay. But if you're overstimulated, um, and there's more than just cortisol. There's serotonin, like we talked about, to keeping you awake. There's dopamine, there's norepinephrine, epinephrine. These are different things that get engaged when you're ready to take on the world, to
Hmm.
focus. If you're on screens too late at night, so wearing blue blockers is helpful, but honestly, really just avoiding screens and stimulation. There's
Hmm.
a full cascade of hormones being activated because what you're signaling to your body is it's time to focus, it's time to work. That somebody's coming to hunt me, it's not time to sleep.
Hmm.
So then the overstimulated Yenvy or Michelle at that point is like, I cannot sleep right now. There's going to be a tiger attacking me. What are you thinking? So from a primordial perspective, right?
Right.
So we're trying to say, no, I was lying, just kidding. Let's try to get really calm, like the gazelle. One minute they're being hunted, the
Hmm.
next minute they can be super calm, right?
Right.
And the idea that that's called flexibility within your autonomic nervous system, which we love to talk.
Thank you. Okay, something important that you pointed out that's happened to me, I would say in the past, I guess a couple years, according to my husband, is the obstructive sleep apnea. I'm not embarrassed to talk about it. I get my own hotel room whenever I travel.
Oh man.
So, and I learned this because I was in Paris with my daughter, and she was in the bed. We have this little apartment that we go to, and there's a bunk bed, and I have my bed up at the bottom. She's in her little bunk bed on the top, and she would say, "Mama," and you're snoring. I can't sleep. And I was like, "What?" And my husband's never complained about it. The only time he's ever complained about me snoring
So
at night
sweet. Dan is so sweet.
is when I was pregnant and I was like, I had gained like 50 pounds, and he was like, oh, you're snoring. I had to go to the couch, right? He's never complained about it since then. And then all of a sudden, he's like, oh, yeah, you snore like really loud. I was like, what? How haven't you? I didn't realize how bad it was until my daughter took a recording of it. And I was like, this sounds like Dan. I was mortified. And then I warned my friends who I've gone on trips with. I was like, hey, supposedly I snore. And I asked my friend, they're like, yeah, you snore. When did this start happening? And then you bring this up. So I want to know more about this because some of you might have amazing like partners and spouses that aren't telling you, or maybe they are, but this is something that we should all know about because it's scaring me. Because
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely. So you want to get like a polysomnogram,
what
or
is
a
that?
sleep study test.
Oh, okay.
And that can be done, that is usually covered by your insurance through your primary care. It can be done at home most of the time. If you wear your Aura or your Whoop or whatever, sometimes it'll say you have oxygen disruptions,
Mm.
or notice if you're like moving a lot in your sleep.
Mm-hmm.
It'll show you on there. It can be an indicator, but those are not technically, gold standard. Um, there's different ways to treat that.
Yeah.
And the gold standard treatment is a CPAP, the continuous positive airway pressure that you wear, but a lot of people don't like to wear those if they don't have to. Oral appliances is another one where they bring your jaw forward a little bit more to open the airway. But there's basically structural and there's central,
Mm.
and so the sleep study will help, and speaking to your provider about it to
Mm.
tell which would be helpful. But oftentimes, I will have people even just try the mouth guard first and have that custom made, usually by the dentist. And by the way, dentists do sleep studies too, which is
Mm.
really cool. And they work with, there's so many ways to get sleep studies nowadays.
Yeah.
It's like a thing. So for mild to possibly moderate sleep apnea,
Mm-hmm.
but snoring, more than likely, it's going to be structural.
Mm.
Okay, if you're
Mm-hmm.
snoring. And so then there's like surgical things. I know you don't need to lose weight. Sometimes it
How
is
did you know I was
painful.
thinking that? I was like,
I know, because we are connected, girl. I love you so much. And you were snoring probably if we asked Dan when you were all doing your
oh,
bodybuilding and
he
lifting
said I was
all.
snoring then too. I was like, when was I
Exactly.
really
So
lean
I don't
and
want to hear
fatty?
it,
He's like,
Yenvy.
yep, you were snoring too. And I was like, what's going on? Maybe it's the post
Oh
something.
man,
I
because
don't
I
know.
love you and your types are always like just 10% more. Anyway, it's good. It's good. And then alcohol is obviously going to make it worse, but yours happens, without that.
Hmm.
Sleep hygiene and circadian alignment. So, um, insomnia that happens with it, it's going to make you even more tired, like your body is just really going to like, oh, there's dysregulation happening. And then another thing is like doing nasal breathing.
Mm. That would help open up and kind of
Mhm.
teach and
There's a,
train the muscle
yeah,
around that
yep.
area.
So you can wear the little sleep tape is a
Mm-hmm.
great place to start. And you're
Mm.
retraining nitric oxide. You have nitric oxide receptors through the nose. So that's a really low hanging fruit to
Yeah.
do the sleep tape and see if you can even sleep with just pure nasal breathing. There's different breath work techniques, this Sudarshan Kriya, sky breath, that helps and regulate your nervous system. So remember, panting like a dog
Yeah.
is going to activate more of, it's a more activating breath. Even nasal breathing is activating as well. It's really about the rhythm of it and just the slowness of it too, that can help. But breathe right strips, also simple if you do find that it's because your nose is clogged, or and then things like saline at night. So a lot of people like to keep their AC running and
Yeah.
their mucosa gets really dry, so saline is really good. Nasal rinses for chronic sinus issues. I know this is allergy season for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Using the Neil or neti pot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think I'm done.
No, that's a
There's
lot.
more, but I'll stop
That's
there.
awesome. That's exactly what I think a lot of us and the women that are listening
Yeah,
wanted to hear is like, what are all the options? And I know it's about snoring, but it's at the same rate. Like we
right.
don't know what we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, what if you have nasal polyps, or what if you have, this is why it's important to like go get checked out. What if you have chronic sinusitis? What if you, have, I mean, there's so many different things, right? So
Right.
just, I know sometimes we like to doctor ourselves,
Hmm. Yeah.
it's good to have
Hmm.
a mastermind with someone.
Yes. So I have a couple other questions. Let's see here. uh, so let's go a little bit into because I wear an aura ring, right? And there's a lot of great data on the aura ring. And
I'm
so
sorry,
and
I was
I
just looking at the question. Sorry, Envy. It was a funny question.
oh yeah,
But
no worries. No, I was talking about my question. Oh yeah, we have questions in here. We have
yeah. Snore jars you awake, the worst. It was more of a
oh,
comment.
it's a comment.
It's funny. Okay, what about
Yes.
the Oura ring? Go back to the Oura ring. My bad.
Usually with my husband, it's me slapping him, going, "Wake up, move over, you're snoring." And
Mhm.
he's a lot nicer than I am, I guess, when it comes to the snoring,
That
obviously.
or he's like super deep and he doesn't hear you, but I
Yeah,
guess he
but
hears you. So anyway,
so going back to the wearables and devices, that's giving us great data, right? And not to stress us out with the data,
yeah,
what should we be looking for in regards to the type of data that's giving us to tell us? Because I know Aura gives you a great rating, like a score, a sleep
an
score.
overall score. Hmm.
And with you, for example, you told me to try to bring up my sleep efficiency, right? And
Which
so
is,
there's these different data points on an Aura ring that tells you, what each of these things mean, and just by looking at the score, I know whether I had a good night's sleep or not, etc., or how do I feel this morning. And so could you just kind of go over some of those data points that would make sense for us to just like keep an eye on? If I looked at it in the morning and I go, okay, what should I be aware of? What does that mean?
yeah. And I say this is because it's kind of challenging because everyone's a little different. So for an example, I see a lot of people who can get deep sleep, but their REM sleep is terrible. Okay. In general, we're shooting for at least an hour, ideally an hour and a half of both deep sleep and REM sleep. Okay. Sleep efficiency is the time in bed versus the time you're actually asleep. And
Mhm.
then also looking at how your sleep latency. So, how exhausted are you when you fall asleep? That means you were not really rested from the night before either. Looking at something called your HRV. So one of the things I like, oh, I wish I had this all pulled up because normally I love to do a little talk on this. But looking at, so when you look at your HRV graph for an example, you should see your heart rate kind of dropping throughout the night. So this is kind of two different things, but ideally you're getting to your low resting heart rate. The earlier in the evening you do it, the more recovered you're going to be the next day. So the earlier your heart rate drops to its lowest in the evening. So if it drops at 4 a.m., that means it took all night, almost till 4 a.m. for your body to recover.
Mm,
But if it drops, let's say at 2 a.m., or let's say even better, like at 1 a.m., that means you're actually charging the battery even more. It's not just repair, it's like charge happening. And usually what you will see, so heart rate variability is not your heartbeat, but it's the time in milliseconds between boom, 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 boom. And so in general, HRV, the heart rate variability, what you see in people who are stressed is the variation is very little because the body's like, oh God, we got to focus, we got to focus, we got to focus. So the time in milliseconds between beat to beat to beat is about the same. Not, it's milliseconds, so it's very hard to track, right? But then the time when your body is like recovered, doing well, ready to go, ready to respond to whatever, have a party, whatever. Now that it's the time in milliseconds, we don't care about time anymore. There's a lot more variation happening between each heartbeat. So ideally, one of the things I love to show people is look at when your lowest heart rate happens, and you should see a corresponding response to your HRV at that time on the graph. Do you want me to shut on my phone? You
oh,
should
that's
see it
awesome. Yeah.
responding, but you can start to see as your variation improves, that's the body recovered.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Right. And so recovery is super important in athletes and professionals and everybody, right? So we want it, part of a measure of healthy sleep is, are we actually recovered? And this is where things like stimulants and caffeine, specifically are going to impair that
Hmm.
big time. Or high sugar at nighttime, eating before you go to sleep. Now, I will say this, complex carbs for a lot of people especially if you have a higher metabolism too, or you tend to be hypoglycemic, doing like eggs and sweet potatoes, pretty great to like at nighttime to not get that sugar low. Okay, so this is why I say everybody's different and it's
Right.
not a one size fits all.
Great to know. Yeah. And so that no, that's great information on the devices. So if anybody in the audience has a wearable, an Aura ring, if you wear your Apple Watch to sleep or a Whoop, for example, um knowing the details on each of those and not being overwhelmed by the data as
Right,
well, right?
right.
And of all the data, it's a balance of all that data, right? It's not necessarily one's more important than the other, would you say? Or would you say that?
If there's one thing and I don't know anything, is like when do I hit my lowest heart rate?
Mm,
I would say that
that's a,
that is the single thing that it's just like, oh man, I don't know, like looking at my resting heart rate
right.
overall, like just
Makes sense.
it would be like the one big indicator because HRV, like especially it takes time because everybody's amplitude is a little different. So some
Yeah.
people may be in the 100s, 200s, where some of us hang out in the 20s to 40s. So like over time, you might get to see something, but when is your heart reaching its happiest?
Yes.
Is probably, I think, the best indicator.
Mm-hmm.
Because what I tend to find is people get overwhelmed by the data and they don't even look at it.
Yeah.
And they're just like, oh, I don't know what to do about this. So, okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
So, but, if they're paying attention to that, I would also say just looking at how much deep sleep and REM sleep they have and noticing that if it's in the red a lot, you definitely, I'm not even saying maybe, and you don't know how to fix that, you definitely pair up with someone, okay? Lots of us out there to help. Because it doesn't matter what pill, supplement, hormone, whatever, if your body is not recovering, if it's not getting into those brainwave patterns that it needs to start doing what it needs to heal, it does not matter. Like everything is going to go awry. So those are the main, I would say, metrics.
Awesome.
REM, deep sleep, and your heart rate.
Great. So one of the key things, and I noticed this as well, in my sleep is, and my aura ring tells me as well that my body temperature is higher than normal.
Mhm.
One, and then I have night sweats, and I'm sweating, or I'm just like, it's so hot, right? And then
Mhm.
I pull the blanket, and I have the blanket on only half of my body. I was like, okay, that feels better, right? So, I know, weird, but could you explain why this happens? Why we
Yeah,
get the and like what's the best? You mentioned progesterone earlier. Help.
estrogen. So this is like a
Oh, estrogen. Okay.
estrogen deficiency usually is going to lead to what's called those vasomotor symptoms. So
Okay.
your estrogen is starting to drop. And there's a lot behind, getting your estrogen levels back up. But in general, it's that estrogen. And when you have that estrogen on board, your body temperature will start to drop more. Okay. And if you're in normal cycling too, remember that our hormonal cycle for women when it comes to our sex hormones is not a 24-hour thing. It's a 28-day thing. It's a monthly thing.
Mhm.
And so noticing when we're going to have those estrogen peaks during our cycle happen, those are going to be the times we're going to be hot, like wearing like the cooling pads, things like that, cranking the AC down a little bit. So you can adjust to your cycle as well.
Mhm.
But in general, it's estrogen deficiency.
Okay. So if
I'm
I was
sorry.
using
Yeah.
the Flow app, for example,
Oh, okay.
um, I would look for the phase where my estrogen is going to drop pretty low
Right.
and be ready for it. Basically, cranking down my
And see,
AC.
yeah. See if see if that's actually what's impacting you, right?
Yeah.
Is pay attention on your flow app and it'd be like, okay, oh, this makes sense, my estrogen is dropping now.
Mhm.
And yeah, you absolutely could.
And with the hormones, the changes in hormones, for example, I know a lot of people, not just like anxiety starts to happen at night as well because of just you're just thinking about things. And a lot of times it's just like craziness thoughts, right? You're just making up stuff while you're laying there because you're like you have nothing else to do. And so and things start cycling through your brain. And so how does your hormone impact that? Like just because is it because you can't sleep and then you start having crazy thoughts and then like start having anxiety
It's
around it
both.
or like
Yeah.
you know,
So it's like, it's right. It's already started from the day before. And like, what are we stacking? Right.
right.
So at one, I'm going to say unclog the pipes. Okay. Because a lot of people focus on, I don't have enough of this. I don't have enough of that. But there's also this concept of like metabolites or trash in the pipe. So
Mm,
detoxification pathways with these different, um, byproducts of metabolism, let's just say, is very important to support that. And a lot of people don't. And we just have a lot of crap in our environment, to tell you the truth, EMF,
mhm.
all sorts of things that impair our cellular function. Okay, so that is, we got to get rid of the trash from yesterday before we add more trash from today. And that keeps stacking over time. Um, Next is people are, I mean, this is from a simplistic view,
Yeah.
but not so simple, is do you know how to calm down? I'm going to tell you right now, a lot of people don't know how. They really don't. Nor do they take the pause. Like even just sensing the pause that we felt right now, you're like, oh, your nervous system shifts.
Mhm.
And that is so important.
Mhm.
Because that pause is also the chill that leads to the healing, that leads to the detox, that leads to the regulation of different things. And until we know, like, connect with that, it's going to be, again, we're just there. I can give you L-theanine, I can give you GABA, magnesium, all these kind of things, but please turn the fire down.
Recommend meditation to help with that right before bedtime.
Absolutely.
Journaling and
I find,
meditation, maybe.
what now?
Journaling and meditation, probably.
Journaling is great. Meditation is great. Walking, I find oftentimes that people who are really tired and wired, the first thing they do is reach for,
Their phone.
yep. So this needs to be out of the room,
Hmm.
and watch how addicted you are to it. Mhm.
Yeah.
This guy right here, number one cause of insomnia
Mm.
for so many reasons.
So the more of the story is that it's not just the hormones, but we're stacking so much on top of the fact that we're going through these hormone shifts,
Yeah,
right?
our body
And
is just responding to our environment.
that's right.
That's what it's designed to do.
Hmm.
So if I keep telling it that it can't rest yet because there's shit to do, read this, look at that, think about, then it's like, okay, well, I guess we got to stay up so we can get all this stuff done.
Yeah.
But if we start saying, you know what, body, the psyche over here is kind of overstimulated, we're
Hmm.
going to go ahead and take a chill. There's nothing like journaling, like you mentioned, is just getting it out of your head because a lot of people have things on tape because they
Yeah.
don't want to forget. Right? And so they
Yeah.
journal, they write it down, and all of a sudden it's written and they can relax.
Right.
Right.
Right. So final question. Um,
Okay.
Final question. So if I was an individual that's having, whether I'm going through perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, or I'm
Mhm.
just having a hard time sleeping due to all the above, right? Tell me about the journey. If I was to come to you, what does that journey look like, where you can help me?
So there's, um, we talk about like looking at your symptom history, like timing, the patterns, if we're talking about sleep specifically, right? Your cycles, are you having vasomotor symptoms? So this will start giving me, I mean, in med school, they tell us like the history tells us, the diagnosis 90% of the time, right?
Mhm.
If we get a good history, right? So those things, lab work is important, because sometimes you can have deficiencies or spiking of things. A lifestyle audit. So, are you exposed to a lot of screens at night? Are you around a lot of EMF? What is your stress level? So, I can tell usually within 2 seconds of talking to someone if they know how to regulate their nervous system.
Mhm.
And it's not a judgment, but it's a reality that it's like this body has not chilled in a while.
Mhm. Yep.
And that's what a lot of our work does. So Myrna and I, we meet almost weekly with our clients, if not text. And the first couple within that session, we're like, okay, we're going to take some breaths here.
Mhm.
We're
Great.
going to pause and create space. So light exposure, then we talk about circadian training. Okay,
Mm.
so we start looking at all these different things. We're going to introduce what we call like the chill or the parasympathetic rituals. We're going to look at their response. And honest to God, people have so many life stressors too. And so it's just being able to like talk about that and have tools to address it that are super duper important. The reason we do labs is we make sure there's nothing scary, nothing crazy, that sleep apnea stuff that we talked about. Hey, let's get a sleep study because that could absolutely be affecting it. So that's kind of a holistic. Our clients will tell you it's like over an hour to fill out our intakes, but
That's important.
it's important,
And it's not,
you know.
it's also a combination of you coaching your patients
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
It's not just having patients and then telling them what to do, it's coaching them. So it's a really
No, because
all around.
yeah, like you said, yeah, and like it like if it was as simple as I tell you to do it and you do it, okay, great. But we all know we're human and that's not the case.
Right.
That it's those small, consistent things. And a lot of people are hard on themselves, like they expect things to be changed immediately. And then when it isn't, they're like, I give up, you
Yeah.
know. It's kind of
Exactly.
shifting a lot of mindset too.
Awesome. Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Dr. Michelle Cox. Um, if you're listening, and you have any questions or anything, or you want to get in touch with Dr. Cox, tomorrow we will send out an email with all of her information, different ways to connect with her, and also book time with her so that you can have a conversation with her. And I think you provide a 15-minute
Yeah,
discovery call as
I
well.
do.
And so feel free to reach out to her, book some time with her. She's excellent. And, if you're trying to avoid pharma and all this traditional medication, you may need it, but you may also really not need it as well. And so there are different ways to approach, whether it be sleep or just symptoms and issues that you're dealing with. And so Dr. Cox would be the person for that. All right. So thank you so much,
Yeah.
everybody, for joining us today. And I look forward to seeing you all in the future. Thank you.
Bye.